where do you start? Especially nowadays where there's just so much information online. How do you know the information you're getting is accurate historically? How do you even interpret that information? My typical day was waking up 3-4 a.m. in the morning. You'd have to do your snan pan, you have to bathe, you have to do your own part puja. And then the katha would start around 5:30 or 6 a.m. We'd do this outside. There'd be peacocks kind of blaring off in the field. When I think back of it, those are like kind of my fondest memories. How do I give access to this type of material to people who are not, in the university setting? Oral histories are making a massive comeback in academia, putting a lot of emphasis on what the traditions themselves say. In the colonial period, we have seen such a change in perspective of how to interpret what's written in Gurbani. So by grounding it in the sources, that allows us for like a deeper engagement and understanding. Not only is the course presenting information or texts that have not been translated before, but also presenting perspectives that frame, let's say, interpretation about not only Gurbani, but about Sikh itihas as well, Sikh history as well.
Welcome back to the Ramblings of a Sikh channel. I'm your host, Jvala Singh, and in today's episode, I'm thrilled to welcome back Dr. Jvala Singh, who previously joined us to discuss Suraj Prakash and the Salabur Granth. This time, he's here to introduce his latest project, StudySikhi.com, a groundbreaking platform designed to make Sikh knowledge accessible, engaging, and deeply impactful. We'll discuss how the platform integrates oral traditions, pre-colonial texts, and modern research. We'll also dive into the practicalities, what courses will be offered, who the platform is for, and how Study Sikhi sets itself apart as a truly transformative learning experience. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to support our channel. Now, with that all out of the way, let's get started. What inspired you to create the platform, and what has your journey been up to the point of creating it? So kind of what were your personal experiences, your challenges, or perhaps gaps in learning resources that you thought, what, I can try to plug those gaps. I can try and provide something that resolves perhaps some of the issues that you noticed.
Well, I think my journey is a kind of a separate question, but when we talk about what was a passion to kind of start this endeavor, it was largely because there was a problem that I thought was apparent in the study of the Sikh tradition is that, where do you start? Especially nowadays where there's just so much information online. You could go to Wikipedia or Sikhi Wiki or any of these websites, right? But how do you know the information you're getting is, first of all, accurate historically? And then how do you even interpret that information, right? So it's a big problem that most people don't have access to a teacher or a guide or somebody to kind of take them through the material, right? Take them through the information. And that's what, Study Sikhi is going to be about. It's going to be about, facilitating the type of information that is accurate, that is helpful, and that will provide, new insights, new ways of looking at the Sikh tradition as well. So, that's what has kind of pushed this endeavor, is that I wanted to give people access to this type of information, and that type of information is, stemming from my journey, right? So my journey is, a culmination of my studies, which are both from a Sampardaic or like a traditional learning institution perspective, but also from an academic perspective, right? So, my formative studies, my training was with Sant Indrajit Singh, Rakbewale. So he's studied under Sant Gurbachan Singh from Jatha Pindra, but he has also studied from other teachers as well. He's also spent time with Nihangs, etc. So I spent 6 months there. I did Santiya Gad Guru Granth Sahib with him. We looked at other texts as well, Vairag, Shatak, and some other type of Vedant texts as well. So that kind of gave me my, foundation. And that approach that he taught is really difficult to engage with unless you spend, an extensive amount of time with a teacher like that, right? So that type of learning and instruction is really conducive to somebody who's spending a lot of time with a teacher. I lived with them for 6 months, and I spent another, month and a half with them, traveling, etc. So there are people that are doing that from the West. I know of a few Singhs who have gone there and who studied in this way, but that is really rare, and that opportunity doesn't exist for everybody, right? So I was very fortunate to have that opportunity. And then following that, I pursued, we'll talk about this after, but a legal career. I did law school, which has its own benefits, which we'll talk about. But then I did a master's in study of religion at UFT, University of Toronto, and then followed that up. I just completed a PhD at University of British Columbia, where I was in the Department of Asian Studies, looking at Sikh historiography, like how Sikh histories or narratives are created in the pre-colonial period. And then, I've taught both at UBC and I'm currently a lecturer at UC Berkeley, where I've taught, the making of modern Sikhism at UBC. And I've taught, medieval to modern South Asia at UC Berkeley. And when I've, talked about these courses that I've been teaching, a lot of people online, like yourself have reached out, you said you'd love to be a student in the class, which I really appreciate. And, that was also kind of pushing me forward. Like, how do I create a platform, or how do I give access to this type of material to people who are not, in the university setting or in that specific university setting, right? So, that was what really kind of pushed me forward in trying to tailor a course where, anybody around the world could join in. And then I can act not as a teacher telling you, like, you must believe this about the guru, or this is, the correct idea behind a certain concept, but to facilitate the best, both in, academic studies, the best type of academia, kind of present that to the students, what to look out for, to critique it as well, but also present it from a Sampardaic perspective, which in these types of settings, that's very rare, right? To have that kind of insider knowledge of the tradition. That doesn't usually get presented in, academic settings.
Just going back then, when you mentioned that you had spent time in these Sampardaic settings in this traditional school, could you, like, I'm just personally curious because I really would like to have done something like that. And I know one or two people who have done something similar. I don't know whether they studied to the extent that you did, but they definitely went and spent some time with the Dal. What is the experience of studying in these traditional schools like? Like, what is your typical day like? Just to paint a picture for those listening to this.
My typical day was, and everybody's experience might be different here. My typical day was waking up 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. You'd have to do your snan pan, you have to bathe, you have to do your own part puja, your nitnem, etc. And then the katha would start around 5:30 or 6 a.m. And that's when Baba Indri Singh would do the katha of Ad Guru Granth Sahib, the mukhwak, the hukamnama in the morning. And a lot of the learning there, just like my teacher would talk about his learning, which was kind of similar but different, was you're going to learn it by osmosis, right? So some material is taught to you directly, and that was the material that I studied, like the ucharan, the pronunciation of Ad Guru Granth Sahib. We went through, from the beginning of Guru Granth Sahib to the end. But some of it, like in the katha, for example, that was just however much you're going to absorb is however much you're going to absorb, right? So I would take notes when Babaji was doing katha. And as we would go through the Santya as well, I would make notes of different art as well, like the meanings of Gurbani, right? So he would do katha at 6 a.m. We would take a small break. There was no breakfast after that. There was just like jalpani. It's basically like a tea without caffeine in it. It's a different type of masala they would put in the tea. We would drink that after the katha, and then we would begin the Santya in the mornings, which would be like maybe 7:30, 8 a.m. in the morning. We do this outside, there'd be peacocks kind of blaring off in the fields and stuff. It was really, when I think back of it, those are like kind of my fondest memories. I would do the Santya, I would read, about 5 to 10 pages of Guru Granth Sahib every day. Babaji would correct me. He'd give me insights into different passages as well. And this is the thing as well, like even though you're just learning Ucharan, Babaji would, tell me, for example, like, okay, the Uttanika. The Uttanika means the historical context about this specific Shabad. This Guru was saying it to this Sikh, or in this context, Guru Nanak Dev Ji was at this location, and then certain people approached him and asked him about a certain question, etc., right? And those types of insights have traveled through this lineage of the Gyani Sampardai, or you could say the Taksal, my teacher learned from Sant Gurbachan Singh, who learned from Sant Sundar Singh, and this is Jatha Pindara or Damdami Taksal, which has roots both with the Gyaniya Bunga out of Amritsar, which has links back to Bhai Mani Singh, but also to Nirmale, the Nirmala Sampradaya. So those types of insights you can't find that, right, in academic writing. So I was very lucky to have that experience. So I do the Santhya, then I would go off, and then he would be like, okay, go apaka, like go practice this, go perfect it, right? So you have to recite it over and over again. So spend, a couple of hours of the day doing that in practice. And then in the afternoon, people would take a siesta, a little nap, and then get basically ready for the evening divan, where Babaji would do katha again in the evening, right? So there'd be two katha twice, and you'd be writing out notes. So that was basically the day, right? And you just repeat, rinse and repeat, every day. So that's like my personal experience, with learning. Oh, I forgot as well. After the evening divan, that's when Babaji, like before bed, basically would pick up any other texts. Like I mentioned, Vairag Shatak is this kind of text about renunciation, about dispassion, Vairagya. And Babaji would kind of like speak to that and kind of go through different passages and talk about that. I had a lot of questions about Vichar Sagar, which is a text by Nichal Das. It's read in these Sampardaics as well. So Babaji would teach me about that. And it was basically an open period where I could like ask Babaji about different questions. And I was very lucky. Um, you know, at that period, at that point, Babbadi was not that well known because a lot of the Gatha had not been put online yet. So, for a large portion of that time that I spent there, I was actually alone with Babbadi. It was me, Babbadi, there's a Jvala Singh there, and there was maybe one or two other helpers, civics around, but nobody else studying. There was one student there for like a few months, but that was basically it. So I was very, very fortunate during that time. And now Bobbity has a pretty sizable crew around him at all times, which is really, it's awesome. There's a lot of people studying from him now. Yeah.
Just when you were mentioning about the historical context, I imagine and I know we're going to get into this further on, but I imagine you're going to be bringing that, as you mentioned, into the courses that you teach. Now, how do you bring those traditional historical context or that kind of extra information into academia, considering, as you said, it's an oral source, and anyone who's done any type of history degree, or like, as in, I remember in my first year, I think we had a module and one of the lectures was just, all right, it does oral history count, essentially, was like kind of the question. So how do you overcome that academic hurdle? Because a lot of the time when you try to reference oral history, it kind of gets ignored is perhaps a little bit too strong, but almost, in terms of like it's not taken as seriously as if you were to say, oh, someone in whatever year wrote this and this is what it says. So how do you as a educator overcome that issue with what you're teaching?
From an academic perspective, oral histories are making a massive comeback, right? Academia, and we can talk about this a little later on. Academia, there's bad academia, right? Academic material that we find, but in recent years, academia has shifted to giving deference, putting a lot of emphasis on what the traditions themselves say about certain interpretation, right? So in academia, looking at traditional scholars or those who are embedded within a community, and giving weight, right, deference to what they are saying about the tradition in terms of interpretation has made a massive comeback in recent academic material. So that's not discounted nowadays, right, in academia. But on another hand, in terms of the Nirmale and the Taksal, for example, in these texts, so it's not only that the Gyanya Bunga has survived through this oral tradition, right? There's a corpus of texts that I'm going to be kind of relaying to students as well who are taking part in these types of courses, and then also kind of showing that where to go exactly for certain access on these types of materials. For example, the Gyanya Bunga has commissioned texts like Gurbalas Pachai Chemi, Pachai Dasami. They have texts called Uthanaka, which is basically looking through the historical context of Guru Granth Sahib. And also Sikhani Bhagatmala. All of these texts are part of that tradition, right? So it's not only an oral tradition. And one thing that's really beneficial about the Gyanya Bunga or Sampardaic learning is that you have 300 years of this tradition really thinking deeply about how to pass on this knowledge, right? So if we even look at the word Sampardai, right, what that word is, three components together, right? There's three portions of it. There's two of those are prefixes, right? Sam Pra, dai. Dai means to give. Sama means to properly assemble, to package. Prai means to put forward, right? So they have taken this knowledge, Bhai Mani Singh and the rest of them, and packaged it in such a way, right, that it allows for a proper knowledge transfer forward, right? So when they're looking at Gurbani, for example, and they're seeing multiple perspectives presented in Gurbani, right? They have 300 years of hermeneutics, which means interpreting text or scripture and figuring out how to convey these different perspectives, right? And how to make sense of the certain paradoxes within Gurbani as well, right? So that is just invaluable when looking at a text like Ad Guru Granth Sahib. And without that, right, there's a critique that, why do we need courses or why do we even need a teacher if we, uh, posit that Guru Granth Sahib is the teacher, right? Guru Granth Sahib is the guru meaning teacher. We don't have any intermediaries, so we are just going to get it direct from the source. Well, that is true in the sense that, for example, my teacher, Baba Indri Singh, never said, I am your guru, I am your teacher, basically. He always used to say, even though he's like, 60 years older than me, I'm your elder brother, right? I'm your older brother, I'm helping you, but we are both Gurpai. We are both kind of students of Guru Gobind Singh, basically, right? So you need kind of somebody to, an elder brother to kind of facilitate, take you through this, right? But without that, right, without somebody kind of facilitating that journey, you can really be led astray to say, okay, why in Gurbani does it say this on one page and then on another page it says this? And it's really fascinating within the Ganya Bunga corpus, within those texts, right? Like Sikhani Upagatamala, for example, 18th century, early 18th century texts, you have these questions come up, right? About why in Gurbani does it say this? On within a devotional perspective, or let's say about free will, right? This question comes up about free will, and then on another section of Gurbani it says that there is no free will. How do we make sense of this, right? And the Gyanis have been dealing with this for 300 years, right? So my plan is to kind of draw from those texts and present it. So it's not only an oral history. The oral history is there, but for example, even Sant Gurbachan Singh, you can see that within his katha, like when you listen to it, he's drawing from other sources too, not only his own Gyani Abunga or the Tiksal, but he's drawing from Nirmala sources as well, like Tara Singh Rotam, who is really respected and who we talked about in the Sarablo podcast previous to this. You can tell that Sant Gurbachan Singh is drawing from those texts as well. So these types of texts have largely been ignored in modern Sikh academia, and that's something unique that I'm going to bring to these courses and drawing from those texts and facilitating students to you can look through this text, presenting all of the translated material which has not been translated before, something that is also unique in the projects that I've worked in the past, like Mangalacharn.
Two questions, and I'm just trying to pull them back together because we talk about so much and then there's so much that I want to ask you, but two in particular. One is that you mentioned at the beginning how you're going to, obviously, and we've been discussing it, how you're going to introduce or include the Sampardaic interpretations into the academia, which is brilliant, and it's about time. My question, one question that follows on from that then is how are you going to put forward the different Sampardaic interpretations? So for argument's sake, a really easy one, not that we need to get into it, but is for argument's sake meat. Like just a Sampardaic understanding on that is very varied. Or even perhaps, I don't know, the kind of association with Dasambani kind of varies perhaps along as in some, I don't know, for argument's sake, Ogurdanti, some Sampradayas have a particular view of it and some kind of do accept it as being kind of the writings of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, right? So would the plan be so on a topic like, I don't know if it was, and again, I'm just kind of creating a story here, but let's say the topic was writings of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, would you put forward essentially that this Sampradaya says this Sampradaya says that, and kind of you as the learner can decide where you sit amongst all of this?
That was a great question. I'm really happy you asked that, because this course is not designed to present to you information to say that you have to believe, X, Y, and Z, right? This course is a university level course where you're going to be presented with readings from, an English academia and then translated readings that I'm going to translate for you from these types of sources that you mentioned, Sampardaic sources, right? And the idea behind it is that you're going to be presented with a number of different perspectives and views. We're going to critique some, and we're going to, examine some, and we're going to, kind of go through these materials together, right? So that's a great example. We are going to present different perspectives from, the Nirmale will have a different perspective than, let's say, the Ganya Bunga, or let's talk about, Santokh Singh, the most prominent writer in the 19th century. How does he disagree with Udasis in the commentary of Guru Granth Sahib, right? How do you examine, or what is the basis for your examination for Gurbani Arth, the meaning of Gurbani, right? Because he differs with somebody like Anandagan, right, who's an Udasi at that time, right? So we're going to look through these different materials, we're going to examine them, and we're going to think through them, right? So the course is not going to say, the Udasis have the right idea on this, and, the Nirmale have the right idea on this. The idea is that we're presenting this kind of vast, you're going to get a buffet of different perspectives here. And, like in university courses, I present readings, and I love it when the students come in and say, I read this, there's a portion of this that I enjoyed, but, I want to critique the author on, X, Y, and Z. And I'll say, that's very fair. Let's do it, because even if those critiques, even if those questions are valid or not valid, they create important discussion, and it also helps clear confusion, or it's just, straight out valid, and we can talk about it with the other class. So, I love that type of, back and forth. And that's why I want to clarify kind of the format in the course as well, is that you're going to get pre-recorded lectures, but also there's live sessions, right? So if you sign up before the course goes live, you'll have access to these live sessions where, I'm in discussion with the class. You can ask questions, you can critique some of the readings. And that's important because, again, the class is not, I'm not presenting information which you guys have to accept, right? This is kind of a back and forth. And that actually stems from some of the Sampardaic learning as well, where, because I had that one-on-one time with Babadi, I could ask him questions like, how does this make sense with, we read something else, a couple of pages back, or, how do we make sense of that? And that feedback loop is really valuable, right? To get that back and forth. And that's what makes, having a facilitator, having a teacher really valuable, is that, they can help clear up confusion, right? Or they can help validate certain ideas that you have in the back of your mind about this material.
Well, it kind of sounds to me like I remember doing a module at university, and it was like Western philosophy, and you go through all these different philosophers like Hegel, Kant, Hume, like Rousseau, all of these, like all the typical Western philosophers that you hear of. And so I'm very excited for this, because it sounds like you're including people that everyone would have heard of, but equally people that like very, very few people would have heard of. And I think also what would be interesting is, with all the Sampardaic readings and learnings, is that I think people will very quickly come to see that even within Sampardayas, they disagree amongst each other as well, which I think is brilliant, because it will show to people that these Sampardayas aren't silos. They're not kind of all like agreeing on the same thing. There's actually diversity within that same order, which will help kind of, I think, take away the assumptions that we have about Sampardayas and how that kind of traditional school works. But then just moving on with this, what makes the course, and so I guess starting with the first course, which is the introduction to the Sikh tradition, what makes this unique, and how does it kind of set the tone for what you want Study Sikhi to be and to become? Like, what is it that's going to be worth people signing up for and getting involved in? Like, as in, we've already explained a hell of a lot, and I think that's enough. But if someone was already still not convinced, what would you say to make them go, you know what, I might actually want to check this out?
I think what makes it unique is that, well, first of all, for those people who want to enroll, the course is designed in such a way that even if you know some names like McAuliffe MacLeod. These are kind of prominent English writers of the Sikh tradition in the 20th century. Um, Even if you know those types of names, you're going to get a significant amount of new information presented to you from the 19th and 18th century, because we're really in this course drawing from pre-colonial sources, right? And this is what makes it unique, is that from an academic perspective, most people, if they want to get something rigorous on the Sikh tradition, would look to those names, right? MacAuliffe, MacLeod. And the problem with that is they are using pre-colonial sources. Like, let's talk about MacAuliffe, for example, but in such a selective way that is really disingenuous to some degree as well when they're writing about Sikh history as well. So part of this project is to um, kind of critique in a way modern academia, but also draw from modern academia as well, because this is great academic material. And I'm thinking about, the likes who like Mandir, Oberoi, Sian, Nikki Gurinder Kaur Singh. These types of authors have provided, Pashora saying a great service, right, to Sikh literature, Sikh history, Sikh tradition, right? So I'm going to be drawing from that, but also supplementing that with texts that people do not have access to. And this is something that I've been doing for over a decade with Mangalacharya, presenting, translations, excerpts from these texts that have not been translated, right? So that's what's going to be really unique about this course, is that not only is the course presenting information or texts that have not been translated before, but also presenting perspectives that kind of frame, let's say, interpretation about not only Gurbani, but about Sikh itihas as well, Sikh history as well. And that's really important, because if you just look at the raw material, let's say somebody's interested in the life stories of Guru Nanak, right? And they just open up a book, a translation on Janam Sakis. Is that really helpful? Because they're going to immediately encounter, even from, let's say, the most um, let's say non-spicy, let's say the most mainstream Janam Saki. Let's say out of that, we can say maybe the Parat and Janam Saki, right? Even at, with that text, it begins with all the Devte coming down to greet Guru Nanak as he's born, right? How do we make sense of that, right? You need to read across other sources from that time period, and that's where academia is really helpful. Sampardais, when they're working at their best, and when you spend a decade or more, then you get the ability to really read across. And there's great examples of people like that. Swami Brahmdev, who passed away unfortunately, and other Nirmale, and people like Gyani Sher Singh, etc., who have really read across material. But that requires like decades of training, right? Because in Sampradayas, you spend years and years just on Gurbani, right? And there's really so much to read from Gurbani, Bhai Gurdas, Suraj Prakash. There's an endless amount that even Sikhs have written, right? And they respectfully and properly kind of drill down on that, and their knowledge on that is phenomenal, right? This is not a critique on that, but for them to get to the point where they're kind of reading, let's say, what does Tulsidas say in Ramachartamanas, right? What is what are even people like Haraji or Meherban and these other people in the rival Sikh camps, what are they writing? How does that compare with Guru Gobind Singh's writings, right? Which is an important analysis, because these texts are in dialogue with not only the Sikh community but other communities as well, right? So to understand these texts, you need to read across, right? And that is what academia is doing. Like, for example, Sian's work has brilliantly done that. Looked at Haraji's writings. So this is the rival Sikh camp, and how he writes a text called Adi Ramayan, and how that compares with Guru Gobind Singh's Ram Avatar, right? So to understand kind of the tropes, the metaphors, the imagery, how these narratives are being constructed, you need to really read broadly, and you need to know how people at that time were writing these texts, right? So it doesn't really help you. I mean, it helps you to some degree to just open up a text and read a translation, right? But why include information like that, right? What does that do to include certain Indic or Hindu deities in a text that's about Guru Nanak, right? So you need a teacher to kind of facilitate, to understand how these myths, or how the imagery, how the tropes, how the metaphors are being utilized, right? and what purpose they serve. Does that mean Sikhs are Hindus because Vishnu comes down and gives a salute to Guru Nanak? If anything,
Yeah.
it's
But I
showing.
think what's interesting about that is if you change that one sentence to if Zeus came down and saluted Guru Nanak, would that make Guru Nanak Dev Ji Greek?
Exactly.
Like, I think that's an easy way of just getting out of that like vicious circle that we constantly find ourselves in of trying to define Sikhi in relation to Hinduism rather than
Yeah.
just looking at Sikhi in its own right. And I'm looking forward to your course because of its ability to really dig deep into those complex issues and then actually provide them rather than being like, you should just follow this. Here's the information. Go and read it and kind of decide.
Two things, yeah, I wanted to really mention here. People love the text Gursoba, right? This is a text contemporary to Guru Gobind Singh's period. Even the most missionary of missionaries, boomer uncles, will recommend this text, right? Because to them it appears non-Hindu as like later texts like Gurbalas and these texts will. But even within texts like that, you have descriptions of the battlefield and Kali and like all of those types of indic imagery emerges, right? And how do you make sense of that? And that's what the course is going to strive to do. Is not only kind of looking at material, Janam Sakis, Gursoba, Gurbalas, etc., but also how do you make sense of that? Like what are those portions actually doing? And this is why I just want to have 2 points on that. Academia specifically gives you a certain methodology, ways in which to understand a time period, like the pre-colonial period, which was significantly different than the modern period, especially when we have our concept of religion, which is just so boxed and divided, right? And this is not to say that Sikhs did not have their own identity, right? This is a misunderstanding of that whole concept. And we're going to work through that, right? How identities were perhaps multivalent, right? They had multiple layers and multiple connections. And in literature, you're going to be connecting, with different ideas and metaphors and tropes to allow people from different audiences to enjoy it, or connecting to kind of cultural narratives which were used, right? And explaining that. And not only is academia really great for that, this is why Sampardaics are really important. Why? Because they have presented this information from generation to generation to generation in a way that is fantastically pre-colonial, right? Like when you listen to Katha by Sant Gurbachan Singh, he doesn't like avoid talking about stories about Ram and Krishna. He's able to kind of integrate those stories as they are in Gurbani and provide context to them in a way that let's say like missionaries may not feel comfortable with that, but it's just beautifully flowing from this tradition, right? Which was not like allergic to including stories from the broader culture, right? And which are in Guru Granth Sahib, like for example the Puranic stories of Prahalad and Haranakesh, right? Like we can't avoid those, right? So what do we do with them? We have to figure out ways to interpret them. Why are they in there? What do they point to, etc. And that's what I think the best out of academia and Sampardaics can provide in kind of interpreting Gurbani and the Itihas, right? Because the Itihas is directly linked, the historical narratives are directly linked to Gurbani, right? And in a way, like the Janam Sakis, and this is like what Nikki Guninder Kaur says, are really meant to kind of explain Gurbani, right? So these are some of the benefits that students will get from kind of taking part in the course, and I hope will open their eyes up to kind of the benefits of both academia and reading Sampardaic texts.
This is just a random note on the Janam Sakis, which I think is always interesting, which is that the main Janam Sakis that we as a community have accepted are written by communities that we have excommunicated. So like the Mehirban camp, I think the main Janam Saki that we follow is written by those guys. And it's really interesting because then we've actually accepted the literature but not accepted the community, which in itself is a whole different thing. And I try to do some research and kind of not got so far with it, but it's obviously quite interesting. Just rewinding, then you mentioned a number of times whilst we've been talking about just the translations that you will be or have been working on that you will provide. You've spoken about kind of the breadth and depth of the learning that people will be able to access, and obviously you've also spoken about how if they join before the kind of recordings go live, they can participate in these kind of live sessions. To me, that sounds like a hell of a lot of value for what you're kind of providing. I just want to dig down a little bit into what else are you providing to people, because as we've seen, some people are questioning whether this should be kind of a paid for type service. And I just think as we've been talking, it's become quite apparent the amount of value that's in this. So what else in the course would you provide, or are you providing, that people will go, you know what, this is worth every penny that I put into it, or however much it will cost?
I think, I mean, there's a couple of different things. Number one is the contextualization of material, both from Sampardaic and academic sources. The lectures will be there, evergreen. You can view them at any point. The discussions, which I hope are going to be valuable to the students. So after each lecture, you'll get 90 minutes discussion time with the whole class, and we can talk about material questions. And then also the readings, right? So you'll have select passages kind of taken out from academic sources, and also translations that I have done on pre-colonial sources. And those will be in PDF format, presented to all the students for download. There's also going to be assessments. There's going to be short quizzes as well, to kind of just drive home some of the material to make sure students are thinking about them. They're volunteer, like you can do it if you want, but it is going to be there for you. But in regard to, if this should be a paid, uh, if it should be behind a paywall or not, I think, for these types of endeavors, it does cost a lot, to first of all set up a platform like this, to get the material ready, the years of training, in which, salary has been sacrificed, etc., like that. But you know, I think in today's age, it's an understandable question of like, why are we paying for this type of information, right? Um, and I think we're kind of stuck between two different cultures at the moment, right? And we are feeling awkward about paying for these type of products because we still have kind of this older type of culture within us, which is very fair. And that, you go to Gurdwara, the Kathavachik or the Gyanni will then present this information, and you're not paying for any of this, right? Or the scholars in the past, like Ansing Nabha, if we go to the 20th century by Veer Singh, although those books were sold, they're sold basically at cost. They were not, really presenting a big paywall for their material. And you look at Kavi Santokh Singh in the 19th century, and scholars before that as well, right? They received patronage from kings. And I think that model where, the kings or the people who were providing that patronage were collecting from the general public anyways through tax revenue. And then they were giving back to the community, right? They were providing a service to the community by providing patronage to a scholar like Santokh Singh, or to other performers or other services for the community, right? So now our model has kind of flipped, and kind of with the colonial period, you have this disintegrating of patronage for not only scholars but for musicians. And if you look in the musical kind of domain as well, those people who are teaching students Rag Vidya, etc., like that, students are paying for that, right, to keep those people afloat, right? Uh, Great musicians, Bhai Mandir Singh, etc., Baldeep Singh, these people live, based off of the money that students are providing for them, right? So this is the modern model, and it does feel uncomfortable, and there are problems with it, just like the problems of the old model as well. There's only trade-offs. What is better? I don't know. But there's also a possibility for abuse in these types of models, for sure. And I recognize that totally. And this is actually something I'm going to be covering on the Suraj podcast coming up in season 2 of Guru Gobind Singh, where Masands are punished quite severely, and the Masands that are punished are actually the Masands of Ram Rai, which is really interesting. This is coming up in season 2. I'm translating that at the moment. People who are taking money from Sangat and not providing any benefit, right? And I hope that this course is really going to provide benefit. I'm putting my all into this, and you can be assured that production quality is going to be top notch, and the material you guys get is going to be unique, and I hope it will be unmatched. But yeah, I understand that people might be uncomfortable about this. In this type of course, where there's 6 modules, each module is basically 3 hours of content. That's 18 hours of content. And for what I'm charging at the moment, 140, that's American. So I've not done the conversion to British, but that's under, like $8 an hour, which is half of minimum wage. So I just kind of urge people to think about that as well, kind of price it out. But yeah, I mean, all of that money goes into funding the production and making sure that I have the ability to kind of continue producing this type of material. And it undercuts, university courses, significantly. And I do want to stress to people that this is, going to be, a university course level. It's going to be as rigorous as that. And I don't want to scare people away. Like, you can participate as you wish at your pleasure if you want to kind of watch the lectures later, or if you're unable to do the readings. Oh, I did want to say this about the course as well, that there's going to be mandatory readings, like for each lecture is going to have 1 reading, but there's going to be additional readings as well. So those people who are really interested in kind of getting the most out of this course, this is going to be it's going to be layered in such a way that you can really I'm going to present to you kind of the best academic readings on, let's say, when we cover Guru Arjan Dev Ji or Guru Nanak Dev Ji, even understanding the backdrop to that, the Mughal government, right, the Mughal Empire. I'm going to be providing readings related to that, so that you can understand kind of the social political dynamic at that time. And I will talk about that in the class, but I'm not going to go really deep into that kind of in a way that will distract from the material, but provide you the backdrop, but give you avenues to kind of further your study. So I hope the course will be found to be very valuable to you, and I hope it'll kind of meet expectations. And I did want to say that, these types of courses, or when a student really, like in my experience with in my teacher or in academia, when you kind of experience a new perspective or a new insight that kind of opens your eyes up to it really changes your world, actually. Kind of just even a small insight into the writings of Guru Nanak or Guru Gobind Singh, or the history, etc. And there's a real reason behind that as well. Why, for example, Bhai Gurdas had said, there's a line in his Kabit Svaya that he says, "Jaise sat mandar kanchan ke usar dine, taise pon sikh ko ek shabd sikhayega." That it's basically equivalent to, if you teach one Sikh the meaning of a shabad, that is equivalent to donating or constructing 7 temples, mandars, out of gold, right? That is how valuable these insights are. It really changes your whole world, right? And that's not hyperbole, like that Bhai Gurdas is doing. He really means that when he's saying that, because it really does change your world when you get true understanding of even just one Shabad, right? So that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping this course is going to be valuable for students, and but I do understand the concerns about putting material behind paywall. For over a decade, I've provided material on Mangalacharan and then the Suraj podcast. So this is new to me as well. So but I think for this type of platform, it does require that.
No, definitely. I think the level, the depth, the breadth, the kind of the translations, the amount of work that would go into it, I think it's more than fair, the amount. And I just think it's worth at least putting that question to you, because obviously people will always ask. But at the same time, I also think that those who see the value in it will pay whatever like it is, to be quite honest. And those that are questioning it, no matter, even if it was free, they probably still wouldn't actually engage with it. We've obviously spoken about the introduction to the Sikh tradition, which is the first course that you're going to be teaching. What are some of the other topics or areas of Sikh history, tradition, practice, philosophy that perhaps you're particularly passionate about, or I don't know, maybe there's a different structure behind what you're going to teach, but what are some of the kind of upcoming courses, and why perhaps in the way that you're going to teach it? Like why, I don't know, the next module to be next rather than number 3?
Yeah, so we're basically building out a university, right? A library here. So we're starting with just, basic, the foundation, right? The intro to the Sikh tradition. After that, we're going basically Missal period, from the Missal period, 18th century to the 19th century, or sorry, early 20th century, right? And that's going to be called The Making of Modern Sikhism. And that's based off of a course I taught at the University of British Columbia, looking at kind of the pre-colonial period, the lead up to Ranjit Singh's Raj, from Ranjit Singh's Raj to the British, and then the British to basically partition, right? And kind of that's a really fascinating period, that the Sikh tradition undergoes significant change, which is going to be really exciting to talk about. And following that, we're also going to provide language courses. So Gurbani grammar is going to be a course that we're going to launch in the summer, and this is going to be based off of Shackle's work. Not only Shackle's work, I'm also going to be looking at material that is looking at the grammar of Dasam Granth as well. So that will be provided in the course as well, and that I hope is going to be just like a course evergreen that somebody can just go back and view and kind of go through the exercises and the lectures to really get a foundational knowledge about how to kind of deconstruct and interpret Gurbani, right? So I'm really excited about that. So there's going to be language courses as well, basic introduction to Gurmukhi or Punjabi as well. And we're going to build up from there, right? And then we're going to go to more kind of thematic courses. I have planning a course next year on love poetry from Guru Granth Sahib, and kind of looking at the material in Guru Granth Sahib and putting it beside Sufi material, putting it beside other devotional community material, the Bhakti material as well. So there's these types of course planned for 2025. But hopefully over the years we build up this vast library where we eventually bring in other scholars as well to speak on specific areas or specific topics. But as this platform kind of builds, then the courses will vary quite a bit.
We've spoken a number of times, and you mentioned about how pre-colonial texts are kind of almost an important base that you're going to ground people in, and you're also going to obviously introduce new translations and new authors and thinkers that people may not have heard of already, or may have. Why is grounding a course, well, why is it important for you to be grounding this course in pre-colonial literature? And also, why is it important for you to bring people who others may not be so aware of to the forefront?
I think it's really important because in the colonial period, we have seen such a change in perspective of how to interpret what's written in Gurbani. So by grounding it in the sources, let's say, what does Sipahi Mani Singh or the text like the Bhagavad Gita say about interpreting Gurbani, or how do they understand certain passages of Gurbani? I think that allows us for like a deeper engagement and understanding of Gurbani and the Itihas, right? Both thinking through kind of the myths and the different aspects to the Janam Sakis and the Gurbalas, these texts that relate to the history of the Gurus. I think it provides a very valuable insight into how to interpret those, right? Which are not, they're not old in a way that is not relatable. I think actually the Sampardaic perspective from those pre-colonial texts are beautiful in the way that I think the younger generation can understand. For example, when they say that Gurbani can be interpreted based on, and this is how they would put it in their language, one's own avastha, one's own kind of spiritual position, right? Or experience. But another way to look at that is that when looking at a piece of art, and this is what Nikki Gurinder talks about so beautifully in some of her works, part of academia, is that, when you're looking at a piece of art, it's dependent upon the viewer, right? How they're going to interpret that. And that is actually what's so beautifully described in some of these pre-colonial texts is that Guru Arjan Dev Ji is saying to people that um, based on one's perspective, that is how they're going to interpret Gurbani. And there's different modes of explaining Gurbani to different types of people, right? And those types of like, you know, perspectives are not presented nowadays. When you just look at Gurbani, they're expecting, that's another thing. Like, what is Gurbani, right? How do you even begin your engagement with it? Because most people begin their engagement with it with a sense of, oh, this must be some type of textbook, and I'm going to read it for different clauses or imperatives of what to do, what not to do. And that's not to say that those sections are not in there, right? Of Gurbani, of what to do, what not to do, as definitely advice. They're definitely telling you certain things to do and what not to do, right? But when you only look at it in that way, right, then you're missing a whole lot out, right? You're missing, the different types of metaphors, and it's written in poetry, right? So that is something so beautifully articulated in some of those pre-colonial texts, is how to understand those tropes, those metaphors. For example, like Santokh Singh is the whole commentary on Japji Sahib, Guru Nanak's most famous writing, on just the poetic devices. And like even getting through that is so difficult. But I'll be drawing from some of those texts to kind of show how flavorful, how beautiful some of these texts are. And I think that really gets lost when you're just reading a really dry translation from the modern period, unfortunately, right? So I think that's why it's really important that the pre-colonial period and those texts really present really interesting takes, and that's what I want to present to the students, and varied takes as well. Like you said, like some of these sampradayas didn't agree with each other, right? And that is going to be informative to us, right? Like, for example, when we look at the period of Guru Gobind Singh, and he's writing a text called the Ram Avtar, how do we understand that? We're going to read that with Tara Singh Narottam's, the Nirmala's take on why Guru Gobind Singh is writing about the Puranas, etc., right? They're different takes, right? And we can present that to students, and we could say, what do you guys think? Like, does this resonate with you? And so we're going to present, the idea is that the pre-colonial engages in these texts in a way that is unique from most modern engagements, right? Not all, but most.
You earlier mentioned Oberoi, and you've also mentioned the course Making of Modern Sikhism. Now, I, for one, think his book Construction of Religious Boundaries is one of the best pieces of academia to come out ever within the Sikh kind of field. A lot of people listening to this are probably going to shoot me down for saying that, which is absolutely fine. Like, everyone is more than entitled to their opinion. My question, though, leading from that is, how will this course perhaps address the community's mistrust of certain academics, whilst also recognizing their unique perspectives that they offer through their own scholarship? Like, for whatever you want to say about Oberoi as a writer, his book is at least worth reading. Whether you agree with it or not, his take is interesting. Just like perhaps the Nirmala's interpretation of why Guru Gobind Singh Ji is writing about the Puranas, we might not necessarily agree with it, but it's still interesting. So how will perhaps your course deal with some of those sticky issues, those sticky kind of authors or topics, alongside perhaps the depth of traditional Sampardaic teachings as well? Because you're mixing the traditional, you're mixing the modern, you've got people writing hundreds of years ago, you've got people writing, I think he released that in 1991 or something, so it's as old as I am almost. So how have you thought about dealing with all of that?
That's a very difficult question, and I understand why the community is very skeptical at times of modern academic works, which can, at their worst, be disingenuous and just be kind of pushing narratives, let's say, that are against the community in some sense, or they're just driven by other means, which is not helpful to kind of general Sikh academia. So I would say that one way that we're going to address it is kind of drawing or bringing in other academic material kind of outside of the Sikh world, right? So, for example, to bring context to some Oberoi's work, which I agree, I'll put on the record, Oberoi's work is fantastic, is brilliant, but just as brilliant as it is misunderstood, right? Oberoi's work is largely just read in a way with kind of this preconceived notion that he's saying that there's no such thing as the Sikh tradition and we're all Hindu. This is incorrect. If you read the book properly, without any judgment going into it, you'll see that's not what he's saying. Um, and part of my job as a facilitator in these courses is to take you through these types of difficult works and point you to areas in the works that you may have just kind of ignored or just by accident kind of just skimmed through and not actually absorbed, to kind of show you the worth in some of these academic works. That is not to say like every single work that I'm going to present is without critique, right? We're going to talk about, blind spots in some of these works as well. But to address some of those questions and issues, I'm going to be drawing from other type of academic work as well. Like, for example, speaking to issues that relate to Oberoi's work, there's a brilliant work by Carl Ernst who writes about, I believe the text is called Situating Sufism in Yoga. And he talks about this kind of blend between how Sufis were integrating yogic practice into their into their tradition, and kind of thinking through these ideas about syncreticism versus essentialism, right? And these are big words that might require some time to go through, but thinking through like this idea of dilution of a tradition being absorbed by another tradition, what does it mean for that to happen in the pre-colonial period? I think that's where academia really shines in kind of explaining a world which was not like our own. Like today's modern world, when you go back into the pre-colonial period, there's absolutely continuities, but the way in which they viewed certain identity and practice and community was much more shared, and I'm gonna hopefully show that to many students in a way that I hope will be absorbed much more readily than just kind of picking up, let's say, Oberoi's book without any kind of without any kind of background knowledge about it, or without any I know, in a way, kind of guiding, right? You need a certain type of guidance when you look through a book like that. So I understand the community's mistrust, and I've thought about this for some time, and I do think there is a real anti-intellectual kind of wave or vibe in the community, and I understand the apprehension, kind of the yeah. I think that really comes from a few things, and certainly abuse from people like Sant Babe and Gyanis who kind of misuse their position, and for Sikhs to be wary of that, I totally understand that. Especially people in the academic game who are really, really willy-nilly kind of make ideas up that are kind of in a sense baseless. So I understand that, but you know, part of the idea behind the course is to present beautiful works, right, which have been produced by amazing academics, right? So part of the course is to kind of show that there's amazing work out there which can really open your eyes to Sikh history, Sikh, Gurbani, etc.
I think you're right that obviously you will be bringing these beautiful works to the forefront, but I think also what's interesting is that you're going to be providing students with those methodological approaches such as critical thinking, humility, language skills, debate, just even the ability to disagree, for argument's sake, over perhaps kind of more, I don't know, maybe traditional ways of kind of just memorizing facts and just being like, well, I don't know, Guru Nanak Dev Ji was born in this year, rather than perhaps discussing what is Guru Nanak Dev Ji saying in Japji Sahib. Why do you think, or how do you think these type of approaches are better than equipping the students for independent discussion, but then also the ability just to be able to reason with just anyone, like come into the future, like everyone gets asked, if you look like you or I, you often get asked like, what do you think and what do you believe and who are you in some of the most random places. And I think this would be an interesting way of providing people with that type of grounding. But just from your opinion, how will this course help students to become better grounded in our own traditions?
I think because we're gonna go uh, to a depth that I think has not been widely disseminated. It's not available online. Like, what is devotion? What does bhakti mean from a Sikh perspective? Like, when Guru Nanak's talking about, uh, bhakti or devotional practice, what does that mean? What is his concept of God, right? How does he feel about love versus fear? Like, there's so many aspects or narratives online that I feel like also need to be corrected. Like this aspect, like the Sikh tradition is not based out of fear, which I think is in some degree ridiculous. I think like if you read Gurbani, there's quite a bit about how fear is actually the basis, or fear and wonder are actually tied together. That word and the interpretation of that are tied together, right? So we're going to be looking at certain narratives that are just online that people are aware of, that you'll find on Instagram or your WhatsApp groups or all that type of stuff, right? And kind of providing a depth to that material that I think is not available, but for going to a university class and studying under a Gyani for an extended period of time, right? But for those two avenues, understanding this material at very deeply, I think is very difficult, and I don't think is available to people. So, that's what I hope the course will provide. Um, but yeah, I think it will be eye opening in that, yeah, I'm not presenting ideas like if we think about our last podcast when I was presenting Tara Singh Narotam. For those people who don't know, like that guy is a big deal in the community. And when I actually read his works, I was like, wow, this is actually pretty ridiculous. Like the takes that Tara Singh Narotam has are pretty weak, right? Um, and I think that's what I want the students to realize as well. It's like when I present them information, I'm not telling them what to think. I'm telling them, okay, this is what the information is, and these are ways to think about it. And how do you think about it? And I was actually, I feel really optimistic and happy about this platform now after teaching for several years, for 3 years at, UC Berkeley and UBC, that I had students at the beginning of the course who just came in and they just heard the word Oberoi, for example, and they would be
Yeah,
like, ah, nah,
I'm
ain't
out.
for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then by the end of the class, right, by the end of the course, they understood what he was getting at. Even if they fully didn't agree, they could respect that position, right? Um, and I think that is kind of the journey that I want to take people on. Not to say like you have to come to my perspective, but understand these different perspectives, right? Because even that is just eye opening. That changes your whole perspective on even how you view the world. When you think about how Guru Nanak was talking about Paramatma, or how Guru Gobind Singh is talking about Jale Hari Thale Hari, like all these different ideas about God and divinity, right? Um, I think it really changes your interaction with the world, and I don't want to get too I don't know, kind of hair fairy here, but like it really, like when you think about, for example, what does it mean to be practicing humility, for example, right? Guru Nanak talks about this over and over again as like a key, as like the step to liberation, right? Um, and I think the way in which, Punjabis and Sikhs just naturally interact with these ideas from a social let's say engagement is very performative. But I think when we actually dig down into that and we think through like what does it actually mean, and we look at examples from texts like Sikhandi Bhagavad or historical texts, and you see that the way this is practiced is quite different. Or even like when you come to texts in Anand Sahib and they talk about Sanamukh, who is a Sanamukh, who is facing on divinity, right? Who is looking at God face on, right? And you think about just karke, just normally you think, oh, that person who goes to the Gurdwara is doing that, right? And in a way they are, right? There's certain perspectives that are right in a certain light, but Texts like Sikh Bhagat Mala mentioned Guru Nanak talking to his father about this and saying that, if you want to face divinity face on, then you have to practice being friendly to people, right? To being forgiving to people. Like those types of qualities and nimrata, humility, like Guru Nanak saying, that is what makes you face divinity. Like God looks at you in the face when you are happy for other people. I mean, that like is when I read those types of passages, that kind of blew my mind. And I'm like, how do you, if we were to practice this, you're a different person, right? Like you become a whole different person by doing these things, right? And it's not just a kind of a conceptual, like now we think about God in this way. It changes you from the core, right? Like you become a whole different person if you are practicing nimrata, if you are being happy for other people, if you are not always looking for a way to kind of jab other people, right? Like we're going to talk about nindya or slander in the course as well, an important aspect of Gurbani. So yeah, I don't want to oversell this, but I just think like when you engage with Gurbani in a deep way, I think it really changes who you are, right? And that's one thing I really want to offer to students in the course is that um, whether you enjoy the course or not, one thing I think is going to be apparent is that we're going to really engage with Gurbani at such a depth that I think is not readily available online. I think it's quite rare to see that online, right? Because we're going to be putting together all these different types of sources and thinking conceptually through like, what do these, like the course is not going to be like Guru Nanak is born in 1469, Guru Gobind Singh is born in, or passes away 1708. That information is going to be there. If you want to memorize that, you can memorize that. But like the course is more going to be structured to like, what do we mean by Guru Nanak's talking about Nam, Dan, Ishnan? Like, what do those concepts mean? What does Ishnan mean? Why is bathing a core component of the philosophy? When we have soche soch na ho veje sochi lakvar, chope chop. Like if we have those lines, what does Ishnan mean then, right? Kind of this, and we're going to be thinking through these different concepts, right? Why is it important? How have some of these practices been critiqued, like Guru Gobind Singh critiquing just Nam Jap over and over again, right? In Akalo Sut, when he says, if you say Tuhin Tu, he's going to get you to Rab or get you to God, then a bird does Tuhin Tu all the time, right? So how do we make sense of that when in the previous verse, Guru Gobind Singh just for two whole verses just says Tuhin 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 Tuhin, right? Like how do we make sense of that? So conceptually, we're going to be diving deep into these issues, which I think students will really enjoy.
My brain is tingling just listening to that because there's so much that I would love to then, like, as in the Q&A bit of this, I would love to like go back and forth because there is, like, I can see the sense in what Guru Gobind Singh Ji is doing, but I don't want to comment because that's obviously what will be discussed in the course. I just want to ask then, when is the course starting? How do people get involved? What can they expect? What are the next steps? If they like, so anyone listening to this, if they wanted to sign up, kind of by what date do they need to have clicked what link?
These are going to be online, and if you sign up next year, they'll be online. But if you sign up before January 19th, that's when the first lecture is going to go online. That is when you'll get access to the lecture that is going to be released. The first one is on Guru Nanak. And then the week after that, we do our live discussion. So you'll have a week there from the 19th to the 26th to watch that lecture, do the reading if you want. I urge you to make notes and then ask questions, right? Because then we're going to have like a session like this, a Zoom session where you can say, I read this was really interesting, but I didn't understand this aspect of the article, right? And that is really important, especially with academic writings where like if you're not trained in how to read academic writings, they can also be difficult to kind of go through, but so that's also what I'll be helping you with as well in those discussions to kind of make sense of some of those readings as well. But I will select them in a way that, the difficulty level won't be like graduate level. This will be like undergraduate level. So January 19th is when the course begins. There's an early bird enrollment, which is 20% off. That ends January 1st. So if you guys want to register, please register before the new year to get that discount. I would say this makes a great gift as well. If you want to gift somebody something over the holidays, then this is going to make a great gift. The gift of learning about the Sikh tradition. So yeah, you can send it as email to somebody. So those are the days, and then yeah, it's not a problem if you're also unavailable for the discussion. So let's say you register before, or you just understand that on the weekend I work, I'm not going to have time to join in the discussion, or I can't do the readings before the discussion. That's fine. The discussions will be recorded and posted online, and you can watch them at your leisure whenever you want, whenever it's convenient for you to watch them. So even if you register after the fact, you will have access to everything, and it is possible that the questions that you had another student had. So there will be benefit in you watching those discussions as well. It's much more free form. There's going to be a lot of back and forth, kind of like this, where we can just kind of dive into the material and kind of examine it from all sides and all aspects of it as well. So um yeah, that is the first course, and yeah, we hope to have another course, the making of modern Sikhism, after this. Probably that will be launched in May or April of 2025, and then a Gurbani grammar course, which is based off of shackles, sacred language of the Sikhs, in summer 2025. So I'm excited for all of that, and yeah, I really hope I get to see you all, and Amr, I hope to see you there in class
Yeah,
too
no,
as well.
for sure. Yeah. 2025 sounds like it's going to be a very, very engaging and learning year. I'm looking forward to it just to get my teeth into that. I just want to check. I've gone through the majority of what we had kind of planned to discuss. Is there anything that you think is worth mentioning, or anything that you just want to discuss before we wrap up? Anything in particular, just for those listening?
Yeah, I wanted to say like who the course is for as well. So you don't have to know Punjabi. So this is for not only for introduction to a Sikh tradition, but all courses following this. You don't have to know Punjabi. It's going to be in English, the lectures. You don't have to know Gurmukhi. On the slides, there will be Gurmukhi, but there'll also be transliteration below that as well. So, that does not need to be a barrier. This is open to anybody. And the material will be kind of at a university level in terms of the readings. But even if you have not gone to university, or you are a very bright high school student, this material will be understandable. And even if some of the material is not understandable on the first reading, like, we're going to go through it together. And part of my lecture is kind of facilitating that and working through that material, right? What is the material itself? The material is not, as I mentioned, just memorizing of facts, but this is looking through, conceptually looking through, what is Guru Nanak talking about? What is his mission? What are some aspects to his writing? Thematic components of the writing of Guru Granth Sahib as well. So we're looking at the tradition, very broadly, and we're not, pinning down on, on this date, this happened on, we are going to be looking at history, but largely we're going to be providing tools for, how do you understand, Guru Nanak's mission, right? With everything that was happening at the time, how do we understand the importance behind Guru Arjan Dev Ji compiling Guru Granth Sahib, right? What are the different stories behind that? What is the purpose Guru Granth Sahib, is trying to address? What are the issues at the time within the community, right? So these are kind of broader issues and ideas and concepts that I hope the students will have, fun and kind of meaningful engagement with, as opposed to just facts. And that is something that is also different from just picking up a book and reading about the Sikh tradition, versus kind of really thinking through and this is a process of vichar, right? So when we talk about vichar, people often translate that as contemplation, or even kind of meditation. But that word comes from the word vichara. Vichara means to kind of roam, vicharana. So this is causing, if you put the long A in the middle of it, instead of vichara vichar, this is causing your mind to roam and kind of basically leave no stone unturned, right? You're examining, you're thinking through a certain idea or concept in a way that you're really getting to the core of it, right? You're thinking about every single perspective you can about a certain idea. And that's what we're really trying to do here, is trying to do vichar on, the life of Guru Nanak up to Guru Gobind Singh. And the goal is to come out of the course with a really, not only a deeper sense of like tradition about, the Sikh tradition, but it is to come out of the course and to feel that you are provided with tools of engagement, right? You know how to then look at certain stories, let's say from Janam Sakhis or the history of Guru Nanak, Guru Gobind Singh, right? You know how to potentially interpret in Gurbani. How do you interpret potentially conflicting lines in Gurbani, right? Can you interpret Gurbani only literally? Are there other perspectives to engage in the interpretation? How have schools of the past understood different levels of interpretation, right? From Karma Upashana Gyan, these type of three perspectives, or understanding poetic tropes, right? Or what do even certain words mean when Farid is saying like Rukhi Sukhi Khai Ke Thanda Pani Pio? When Farid is saying Thanda Pani Pio, does this literally mean, okay, Sikhs can only drink cold water, right? Like, if you only interpret Gurbani in a literal sense, you're going to say, I guess we're stuck. No Fanta for us, So you're going to come out of the course, ideally, with tools to help you interpret not only the lifetime of Guru Nanak Guru Gobind Singh, but Gurbani, Sikh Itihas, Sikh history, in a way that I think, is not available. It's not being taught outside of university courses or outside of, really intense training with a Gyani or a Sant or somebody who's really embedded in the tradition. And I think that is not accessible for most people. And that is kind of the drive behind the course, right? The drive behind the course is to provide accessibility of this knowledge, of this information to people around the globe, right? So, that's kind of the basis of the course. What I hope people to get out of it and who's it for, yeah.
Well, I will definitely be seeing you in the course. I hope everyone listening to this will be in the course too. I think if everything we've discussed doesn't convince you or doesn't interest you in wanting to join and take part, then I'm not sure quite what will, because the breadth of knowledge you're going to cover, and then the people, and then the ideas, and then just the ability to then go back and forth with one another. It's like this type of platform is very rare, and I think we definitely should support it and have to support it. I'm re-recording this on December 21st, so I haven't got very long to try and edit this and get this out, which I'm going to try and do as soon as possible. But then, I will include all the links in the description below so that people can go sign up directly to the platform. And even if you're watching this in 2025, you should still be able to sign up, even though it may be after the dates that you've mentioned.
But before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you a question as well. Like, what type of courses would you like to see? And I also want to ask the viewers as well, that if you have ideas for courses, please put them in the comments. I'll be reading them. And so Amr, what do you think?
I would love, one topic that I've enjoyed discussing, and we've discussed it in the past already, is just the notion of God. So just divinity, God, because I think I did a philosophy. I went to a Church of England school, which is like basically you go to church like flipping once or twice a term or something or whatever, right? And it's kind of like part and parcel of the school. And so you have to do religious education from year 7 to 11. I then did a philosophy and ethics A-level, and I then did a history degree, which covered a lot of Western philosophers. And you learn all sorts about the West's idea of God and all these different interpretations. But when it comes to understanding the Sikh view of God, you only really get that information if you're in the West, either from the Gurdwara, and again, it's quite often Singh Sabha interpretations of what the divinity is, or you get it through academia. And then I think the issue with academia is, again, you're relying on someone else's interpretation of something. So it's taken me a while to get to what I think is an understanding of God, but within the Sikh tradition, but I'm not convinced of my own position, if that makes sense. So I kind of want a course where I go, okay, this is the context that I'm sat within.
Man, that's so great because I love the idea about a thematic course, kind of upper level, just on divinity and kind of thinking through that throughout the Guru period, but also, how are Sufis writing about this? How is Kabir and other Bhakti writers, engaged with that, thinking through notions of divinity. But I can tell you in this course, SS 101, we are going to be thinking through that because this comes up as a question. Because in Gurbani, and before we get to Gurbani, let's just think about the public narrative about, what we hear online. You either hear online in Sikh spaces that, listen, Sikhs don't believe in a God with a beard and that is in heaven, etc., like this. But at the same time, you get lines from Guru Gobind Singh that says Bihistal and Nawaz hai. That Guru Gobind Singh is saying that Bihist means in Farsi in heaven. That your Nawaz, your residence is in heaven, right? That Guru Gobind Singh is talking about in Jap Sahib, about Akal, about divinity as residing in heaven, right? But then at other times, he's talking about divinity in other ways, right? How do we make sense of this? Because this is the problem that I find with Sikh narratives online is that we're only presented with one idea, right? That either we believe that God is not personalized, that, like let's say from an Advaita point of view, that divinity is within everybody at all times. And in that perspective, that we can only say that, Chalo, main hai Rab, like I am Rab then, Aham Brahmasmi, right? That people say. But then from another perspective in Gurbani, that you have over and over again, you get divinity personalized, right? Personified, and even described with physical characteristics, right? That you have such a beautiful nose, Keshava, you have long hair, etc., right? That you have these types of personified ideas about divinity, right? How do we match these two perspectives, right? When Guru Nanak's talking about both of them, right? And Guru Gobind Singh himself talking about both of them. And this is not a course where I'll say, you know what I think about it in this way. I heard this perspective. I'll be presenting that, look, in Sikhani Bhagtmala, in these old texts from the 18th century, these questions were asked. Your questions are not silly about this, right? Like they're genuine questions about how do we make sense of different perspectives in Gurbani. And in Suraj Prakash as well, you have these question and answers with the Guru, right? They're brilliant questions, right? That people have not really engaged with, unfortunately, right? People have largely put forward their own perspectives because, you've heard of this idea, like, the blind people who have not, seen the elephant, but they're touching the elephant and they're saying, oh, it's the leg and, this is all it is, right? They don't understand the whole, elephant, right? They have not seen the entire landscape, right? But this is what's so brilliant about engaging with these pre-colonial texts like Sikhani Bhagavatamala and somebody like Santokh Singh, who has just spent his whole life engaging with this corpus, like all of Sikh literature from that period, right? He's incorporated that into his text, right? Santokh Singh has seen the elephant, right? Bhai Mani Singh and these people have engaged with Gurbani. They've compiled Ad Guru Granth Sahib, right? Bhai Gurdas has compiled the Adi Granth, right, with Guru Arjan Dev Ji. These are the people that are providing analysis and interpretation of Gurbani, right? This is why Bhai Gurdas is called, the Kunji, the key to Gurbani, right? Because he has seen the elephant, he has done that analysis, and he speaks about divinity in such a way that he helps explain, like he even has Vyakhya, he even has explanation of Mool Mantra, right? When it says, Pavan Guru Pani Pita, why is Pani Pita, right? Why? Gurdas explains this in his writings, right? And this is what the course is going to do as well, is to say, oh, this is not Jvala Singh thinks about Pani in this way, and water in this way, right? The course is on facilitating these works from Bhai Gurdas, Bhai Mani Singh, Kaviraj, Santokh Singh, etc. These people, and presenting their ideas on this as well. When we talk about Guru Gobind Singh and the Naina Devi Saki, right? We're going to go through, because this is going to be part of the stories of Guru Gobind Singh. It's a significant portion of his life period that's related to the creation of the Khalsa, right? And there's great academic work related to that. Dr. Anne Murphy has written about that. Purnima Dhawan has written about that as well. And they provide amazing takes that, these one perspective that I'll share with you quickly here is that, the whole Nana Devi Saki, when Guru Gobind Singh makes Devi Pargat, makes the goddess, appear on the mountain of Nana Devi, this whole story is designed to be a critique of Brahmanical authority and power, right? And I'll help you engage with that perspective and kind of take you through it, right? Step by step, so you can understand that perspective. And then when you have that story, which is like 20 episodes, I believe, something like that, in Suraj Prakash, 20 chapters, a significant portion, how does Santokh Singh himself interpret that, right? Because people like Savarkar, the author in the 20th century who writes Hindutva, right? This kind of the main author behind Hindu nationalism as it emerges in the 20th century. He quotes Suraj Prakash, right? He's aware of that text. He's saying, look, Guru Gobind Singh talked about Devi, he quotes Ugradanti even, right? I believe. And selectively, he doesn't quote the whole thing, because if he did, he'd see that, Khalsa Panthas talked about as Tija. Even that idea about Tija in the 6th module, we will think through, what is the Khalsa Panth? What is the purpose behind it? How have writers in the 18th century talked about it? When Bhai Gurdas Singh writes about Tija Panth as well. Ugradanti talks about Tija Panth as well, the third path. What does the third mean? Does the third just mean you got Indic, you got Islamic, and we're just a separate community? Or is it something else? Is this almost like, a Japanese kind of riddle, which is saying like, there's two binaries, and we are like the third path, which is non-binary. We're like beyond all distinctions, right? I'm helping you think through these different ideas, right? In a way that is engaging with that pre-colonial material from the 18th century and merging that, blending that with academic material, the best of that, best academic material from the modern period, right? So I'm really happy you asked me about this question about divinity, because these questions come up. And when you said that, it just reminded me of the fact that this course is going to be engaged with modern narratives as well, right? So when you have certain Sikh preachers saying that, oh, we don't believe in no heaven, or, we don't believe in a personalized or personified God, right? Or do we think about the gurus as divinity, right? Can we say that Guru Nanak Dev Ji himself is Paramatma, right? Because this is a modern kind of boomer missionary narrative as well, that we can't talk about the gurus as divinity, right? But then what does Guru Granth Sahib say about it? And then what does Guru Gobind Singh say about it? That if anybody calls me Paramatma, they go into the Narak, right? How do we make sense of that? Because early Sikh texts from the 18th century, Bansavali Nama, and their other texts, they have problems with that line. They talk about it. They say Guru Gobind Singh said this. The Singhs asked him, can you clarify? Because what about this? So they're dealing with these questions, right? And I'm going to present how the texts of old dealt with these issues, right? Not my modern interpretation based off of, I watched a documentary on Zen Buddhism, and I think I'm going to draw from that in interpreting Gurbani. Look, there's great ways to draw from communities that are, and I wanted to add this point as well. Modern narratives are going to say that, I read Guru Nanak Dev Ji's writings and I think about Socrates. I think about Plato, and I want to do a comparison of that. And I'm not saying that's ridiculous, right? I'm just saying, as a starting point, what is really helpful in understanding the writings of Guru Nanak, or even somebody like Kabir, or even somebody like Sheikh Farid, is to understand what they're engaged with, right? And this is what academia does really beautifully, is they engage with material across traditions, right? They are able to see, okay, look, Sheikh Farid is talking about this. He's mentioning this community. He's writing in such a poetic mode where he's engaged with these poetic devices and metaphors and tropes. And these are how you understand those tropes, right? So you want to start like that, around Farid, and then basically you build out that landscape, right? And then after that, once you have some depth of understanding in regard to how they're writing, sure, then like you can kind of compare, and that's fine and well, and it makes for entertaining and possibly fruitful engagement cross culturally, right? But to just make that an immediate point of like comparison, where it's like, I'm gonna compare what Guru Nanak says to Steve Jobs, like that, to me that's just as ridiculous as a beginning point, right? Because you see this, it's like, oh, why are we interpreting Guru Nanak in a Vedanta perspective, right? Well, possibly because Vedanta was all the craze during that time. Like these are certain streams of thought during that period. Why are we interpreting Guru Nanak in line with, or let's say in comparison with, yogic thought? Because Guru Nanak has spent extensive time, debating the yogis, Siddh Ghosh, other Japji Sahibs, all these passages which are in relation to yogic thought at that time. So to understand what Guru Nanak's saying, you have to understand what the Nath yogis are writing about as well, right? You can't just understand this by itself. So that's where academia provides its best benefit, I think, is that it reads across, right? And I'm going off on a major tangent here, but this is what Sampardais do amazingly as well. This is why when you begin Sampardaic training in some schools don't even start with Ad Guru Granth Sahib. You start with these small grunts, like Vairag Shatak, Bhav Rasamrit, Adhyatam Prakash, these types of smaller texts, right? Prabodh Chandra Natak. These texts then provide kind of a base curriculum. This is one take on this. They provide a base curriculum so that you can understand certain concepts of, let's say, bhakti. You can understand certain concepts of virag, detachment, about the bhik, about discernment, right? And that foundational knowledge gives you ideas about these concepts, which are apparent in Gurbani, right? But then, because you have that foundational knowledge, you can look at Gurbani and you can say, oh, this is where Guru Nanak differs, right? This is where Guru Nanak is taking that idea and flipping it, right? Which is really important, because if you don't have that, you can oftentimes think, Guru Nanak's talking about Nam, and other people are talking about Nam, and maybe this is the same thing, or talking, let's say, about Ram. Let's say, for example, Ram, right? Guru Nanak uses the word for Ram in his writings, right? How does he think about divinity, right? Even like, for example, Guru Gobind Singh in Ram Avatar, right? If you didn't look at how people are writing Ramayana in other texts, how can you distinguish how Guru Gobind Singh is presenting his version? Because I'll tell you, his version is not the same as other versions, right? So what accounts for that difference? These are the type of questions and kind of the depth that we're going to go into in the course, right? And thinking through that. And academia can provide beautiful perspectives, and Sampardais have been doing this for 300 years. So I'm glad you asked me that question, and it just got me off on a whole tangent, but it's important to think through and kind of deal with the modern Sikh narratives as well about, what is divinity? Is divinity a personalized deity? Is it just ourself? Is there any need to then even have devotion if I am Rab, if I am if I am God itself, himself, herself? And what does devotion look like? You could get really twisted up. You could be like, self-care is devotion. I'm going to go to the spa. This is bhakti, right? Is that devotion? Anyway, so like these types of ideas, we're going to really dig into, and it's going to be fun. I'm like really excited for it. And yeah, because it's not just going to be about what Sampradayas are saying, or academia, but modern Sikh narratives as well. I'm not going to name people, but I think for some people it's going to be apparent when I'm talking about certain issues.
I just think whilst you were talking, there was other topics that I was just noting down that I think would be interesting to get more input in. So I think one thing that I've always grappled with, and I think a lot of people may think that they have the answers, and I don't think they do. I haven't come across anyone so far, and that this isn't necessarily a critique of people out there, it's more so just my kind of lack of perhaps research, is ego, So we're constantly told home is bad, home is bad, and I get it, like I understand. However, just even in terms of the way you talk, you always refer, I did this, I did that, I did the other. Secondly, then, you also have to marry that concept with the fact that, and I know we're like slamming huge concepts together, but for argument's sake, there's meaty peedy as well. So there's also that soldier side of actually saying, because like for argument's sake, Sikhi doesn't have the philosophy of, and again, this is a debate. Technically, Sikhi doesn't have the philosophy of turn the other cheek. You could argue Guru Arjan Dev Ji sitting on the Tati Tavi, though, is hypothetically saying, I will take whatever, like, as in, I'm happy, I am the sacrificial lamb, I am happy to be, like, as in, the hukum is the hukum, and I am happy to go along with that. Similarly with Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. However, you have Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Ji who both battle with the Mughals. And so there isn't that same type of acceptance. And even the Sakhi about when Guru Arjan Dev Ji is on the Tati Tavi and I can't remember the individual's name who asked Guru Arjan Dev Ji, like, why are you doing this? Or like, as in, don't you have the ability to kind of just stop it? And he's like, yeah, of course I can. Like, as in, I can click my fingers and this whole universe would just dissipate. And yet they choose not to. So rewinding a little bit, basically Homme, how is Homme constructed in terms of like, what is it first of all? Like, is it what Jung and what is it the other dude says, psychologist, I forgot his name now, Carl Jung and the other guy, the one who comes up with the Oedipus complex, and it's just
Freud,
like,
yeah.
Freud, that's it. Like, is it what they say it is? Because that's mainly what the Western view of the ego is. How do we deal with the ego? And is the objective actually to obliterate it? Like, is the whole point of becoming enlightened actually the point where you've broken your ego?
So
and then what's the difference between being mental? Because people who are like schizophrenic, you could argue, have multiple egos or multiple facets to their ego, right? Like, does that mean they're enlightened? Because surely they're not, right? So that just ego as a huge concept.
that's brilliant. We're going to be diving into that question when we look into the question of Nam, right? In opposition with Nam, like what is the self? What is whole man? Whole meaning me, meh also meaning, can mean residing within, like meh, or it could mean also just me, right? Like double, like an inflation or like a feedback loop of just like associating with yourself over and over and over again, right? And not understanding what you really are. So that is something that we're going to look at when we look at Manter's writing. He beautifully writes about this. And we're going to put that in, we're going to pair that with writings in Guru Granth Sahib, specifically about Kabir when he writes about this. But these are the questions we're going to ask because of the second follow-up, which I think was really important when you talk about, going to war versus forgiveness. How do we make sense of those, right? Because on one hand, like Guru Granth Sahib says, like Farid says this, Jote Marun Mukhya, Tena Mare Kum, Apna Re Karja Ye Per Tena De Chum. That basically, like, if somebody hits you, don't strike them back, right? What you should do is basically, go back to your home after Padatana de Chum, kiss their feet, and then go home. How do we interpret this then with Guru Har Gobind Sahib, right? How do we interpret this with Guru Gobind Singh, right? Just wrecking people on the battlefield, right? Are they not adhering to Guru Granth Sahib? Well, this question comes up. This is what's so important about the pre-colonial texts, is that, these are not old questions. These are questions that have been asked and that have been answered by people like Bhai Mani Singh, Kavi Sandokh Singh, by scholars of the highest rate, right? And why would you not want to at least engage with their perspective on that, right? And you can, if you want, disagree or take a different interpretation to that or not, but you actually get this conversation coming up in Guru Gobind Singh's kathas, in his stories, and his history, when he goes down south, I believe, and he meets with the Dadupanthi leader, right? And the Dadupanthis ask him about, chalo, the Sahibzade have been obtained Shahidi, obtained martyrdom, but you're forgiving them, so that's great. And Guru Gobind Singh's like, no, this is not a place of forgiveness, right? And he answers that question about, like, in what place should there be forgiveness? In what place do you answer back? Under what context? For what reason? So these questions have been talked about. And Kabir also talks about these when talking about home man, about what is the self? What are aspects of it? And when you are working, let's say, you can't talk about this without talking about free will versus determinism, right? So um, that idea comes into that question as well. So how do old texts deal with that? These are not modern questions, right? And this is what's really important is that within texts like Suraj Prakash and Sikhani Bhagatamala and Gurbalas and all these texts, you get these questions, right? Which range from, fantastic deep questions about, what is the purpose of life, or does free will exist, or in what context should I, practice forgiveness? What am I even? Like is a question, right? Which is related to like home, right? What is ego? But also funny questions like, why do we make prashad? Like that is a real question in the text as well, which is the like I've spent time in like uni SSAs, and people have questions like that, and sometimes people laugh at them, but these are real questions, right? Like why prashad over laddus or over mitai or something? It's a real question. And these questions are in our old text. So um, I just wanted to urge everybody that the old texts that we're going to engage with provide fantastic interpretations and perspectives on these questions, and I'll be presenting that alongside somebody like Mandare, who's looking at, which I don't think he in that question is drawing from a text like Bhagatamala or Santokh Singh, right? But in great ways, I think, and very sophisticated ways, I think they actually line up in interesting ways, which I don't think people fully appreciate. And this is one goal as well. Like, for example, when Santokh Singh, who writes like 20 chapters, I'm going to go back to this, about the Naina Devi story, right? People who misunderstand Santokh Singh will be like, oh, he's a Devi Pujari. He worships the Devi and this type of stuff. Well, how does he interpret the Devi? Is a really important question. Because if you read further in Suraj Prakash, he talks about, listen, Devi is talked about, Mahankal is talked about, and it's foolish to think of these two things as separate, right? Sikhs, normally, when they think about Vaheguru, they could say, oh, chalo, we can call Vaheguru Mahankal, right? And they understand that association, but they have a harder time also saying Vaheguru is Devi, right? But this is what Santokh Singh is pushing. And he's saying that, listen, when Guru Gobind Singh is talking about, and he also in the Japji Sahib mentions this, that, and in contrast to the interpretation of Udasi Anandgan, that Guru Gobind Singh is, and he draws from Charitra Rupakyan, Chopri Sahib, talking about this is what he thinks Devi is. This is what he thinks Akal Purkh is, Asatuj, right? The divine whose insignia is a Asi, is a sword. So these interpretations are more relevant than ever in the modern age, especially when you see online narratives. And I hope that this course is just going to make everybody like ever ready to deal with, give them the tools, give them the Shastra, along with the Shastra, to kind of, like you said, on the street, they get asked a certain question, online as well, right? Amongst family, they can deal with these types of questions and feel comfortable in the let's say fluidity of some of the answers as well, right? Which I think, I hope students get comfortable with, that look, there are multiple perspectives, right? Udasis have this perspective, Nilme have this perspective, Guru Nanak had this perspective, Santokh Singh, etc., and like give all these multiple perspectives. And there's a reason why you have a plurality of practice as well, right? Because certain practices, certain ideas resonate with certain people, right? And because of their own, you can say from a spiritual perspective, avastha, or just their like upbringing, positionality is what you would say in academia, right? Or where somebody is at. They're going to resonate with certain ideas and practice, and that's fine. And that's something I'm going to draw from texts like Suraj Prakash, which says like Guru Har Rai, when he's talking about udasis, right? He says, "E tha, o tha, ped na ko, eke roop janiye do." That this place of the Sikh tradition, this gaddi that I'm sitting on, as Guru Har Rai, right, the mainstream Sikh tradition. And that place, he was pointing to Baba Dera Nanak, right, where the Udasis are. He says, this place and that place don't understand there to be a difference. They're not called, right? Eke Roop Janiye Do. These two understand them as one. And that's fascinating because they are quite different, right? Udasis are quite different in practice, in form, in appearance. But Guru Har Rai is saying, in essence, the tat of it, right? The essence of it is actually the same. So sometimes you can have these differences, and this is why the pre-colonial period is so fascinating to me, is that you have this plurality, right? Well, you do have the mainstream, like the core, the pillar, Guru Har Rai to Guru Gobind Singh. Guru Gobind Singh himself, if you've heard in the Suraj podcast, has a contingent of Udasis within his darbar. Imagine that darbar, which is getting talked about now in the second season. You have like 500 Pathans there from Pir Buddhu Shah in the darbar, right, who are Afghans. And then you have a contingent of Udasis who are ascetic, who are placing ash on their body and have dreadlocks, right? And then you have the Singh Surme, you have the Sikhs who are warriors there as well. And then you have the Matama, you have the mothers. Like, it's so, I think we would be totally shocked if we went back in time and saw the Guru's Darbar. And I think when you're looking at these pre-colonial texts, they're beautifully illustrated in a way that opens your mind up. And I hope the course does that. And I look forward to seeing Amar, you in course, and then other people in course as well.
No, for sure. The only other two topics, and these aren't really thematical or kind of concepts, they're more historical in their approach, which is, I'd love to know more information. And this isn't necessarily something that you may cover, like, as in, I hope you do, but if you don't, like, it's all good. Which is, first of all, the formation of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So literally, how did, like, so for argument's sake, if you look at all of the different writers within the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, they cover quite a large span of geographical space, but also just years in terms of time. Kabir, I think, is writing way before Guru Nanak Dev Ji. People take the Janam Sakhi story of them meeting to be literally that Kabir lived to be like really, really old, which I think is an interesting interpretation. But that in itself, and then also kind of the standardization of the Ard Granth, because I think what's interesting is, yes, we are one of the few religious traditions where our scripture is written by those people themselves, rather than it was a second hand, or kind of it came to someone kind of through an intermediary. So that in itself, because for argument's sake, there's a copy that we've spoken about before of the Ard Granth, I think in Cambridge or Oxford, and it's got Mir Bani in it, and that it doesn't exist in the mainstream manuscripts that you would find. So that's number one. And then secondly, something that again we've spoken about in the past, that I'm sure you'd have to discuss because it definitely comes up in pre-colonial literature, is the relationship between the Gurus and the Mughals. So there's the concept in pre-colonial literature where, and again, when I first read it, I was a bit like, hold on, did I read that correctly? And it's essentially Guru Nanak Dev Ji blessing Babba's house. And then the whole reason it disintegrates with Aurangzeb is because he doesn't respect the house of Nanak, is essentially the gist of it, which I find an interesting interpretation. I can understand why people at the time would be writing it. I already have a question, because for argument's sake, surely Guru Arjan Dev Ji Shahidi is like a big issue in terms of that idea, but also the varied nature. So for argument's sake, I remember you saying to me, maybe in, I don't know, a podcast we did a long time ago, that Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji is playing chess with the Mughal emperor at the time. And this is interesting because Guru Arjan Dev Ji is put to Shahidi by the Mughal emperor too. So you're kind of like, what? But yeah, those two areas in terms of just historical knowledge, I would love to be able to read something or attend something and learn more.
Can I just speak to that for a little bit?
Yeah,
in
please.
regards to the first one. This is going to be covered in the module covering Guru Arjan Dev Ji, and thinking through the process behind the compilation of Guru Granth Sahib, the Adi Granth there, right? And it's really important because you have great academic work by Jvala Singh talking about it, but you also have 18th century Guru Blas Pachai Chemi talking about this, right? Which sheds, amazing light on the process, right? Which also informs how we think about not only, um, the assembly of Guru Granth Sahib, but thematically and conceptually, like what are important aspects? What points does Guru Granth Sahib, like what are the main points that every passage in Guru Granth Sahib has to hit, right? What is the criteria to be included in Guru Granth Sahib? That is talked about in Guru Bilas Pashai Chemi, right? A text which the author says has been narrated by Mani Singh, right? So Mani Singh is narrating this, and then the scribes are writing this down, right? Fascinating. And he would have had this knowledge from Bhai Daya Singh Pyara and then also Guru Gobind Singh, right? So, I mean, this gets talked about and it's really important because also it sheds light on what is the Sikh tradition think about women, right? So, and this is really important because this is from the 18th century, right? You can have modern feminist interpretations on the Sikh tradition, which are useful and helpful. But to have a text from the 18th century, which is saying that somebody approached Guru Arjan Dev Ji, three Bhagats from Lahore, and they presented Guru Arjan Dev Ji with some writings, one of which was just cussing women. It was just saying, they basically people should avoid women. The guy who was writing this was a celibate. He was a renunciate, right? Which is just, par for the course. It tracks with renunciate traditions, celibate traditions, right? And Guru Arjan Dev Ji looked at it and said, no, the Sikh tradition is a grihasti tradition, it's a householder tradition, and we will not include something that is defaming, derogatory towards women, which is fascinating as well. Because you can imagine somebody in a modern perspective putting that tint or putting their perspective on it, right? And that could be fair, right? But to have old sources that directly talk about this, right? Directly talk about how Guru Granth Sahib is not going to defame women, right? And that this is a householder tradition, is fascinating to know. Like they were using that criteria when they were including writings of other people into Guru Granth Sahib, which is also fascinating, which academia provides insights to. The other writings of Kabir. So Kabir, is the most included Bhagat in Guru Granth Sahib. As you mentioned, lived arguably before. We're going to talk about this as well. There's a debate over whether Guru Nanak lived during the time period of Kabir or not. And this is even from Kabir scholars. Some people put his birth at 1398, I believe, before Guru Nanak. And some people actually put it during the time period of Guru Nanak. So this is outside of Sikh scholarship. Whether they met is another question, and I'll come to that very shortly. But, Kabir also has this line, and I'm going to bring this up when we talk about, the inclusion of Kabir's writings in Guru Granth Sahib. He has this line that's saying women basically take away three things from men. They take away, I believe it's their bhakti, their gyan, and their liberation, right? So, pretty harsh, right? And those lines were not included in Guru Granth Sahib. Why? Because they probably did not fit with the theology, with the ideas of Guru Granth Sahib that Guru Arjan Dev Ji wanted to put forward, right? Or Guru Arjan Dev Ji thought that maybe this was an interpolation. Somebody else wrote this and put Kabir's name on it. That's also a possibility, right? That was happening at the time, right? And then we'll talk about the impulse that Guru Arjan Dev Ji had to even assemble Guru Granth Sahib, right? Because Guru Bilas mentions or insinuates that, people were writing certain passages and ascribing it to Guru Nanak, so that Guru Arjan Dev Ji wanted to say, okay, no, we're going to put a stamp on what is Guru Nanak's, and that's it. We're going to compile all the writings. I'm going to compile the previous Guru's writings as well. We're going to put a stamp on it, right? To make sure that nobody does that here on out, which is really fascinating. But then we're also going to look at academic sources like Jvala Singh, who talks about when the Mughals, and this is going to kind of blend into your second question, when Emperor Akbar arrives at Govindwal to meet Guru Arjan Dev Ji, right? When Akbar was traveling, his mobile court had a whole, basically a workshop of both illustrators, right, and writers. And they were compiling these manuscripts, which, were translations of indic texts, as well as, his own texts and translations of Babaranama, etc., right? So that workshop, Jvala Singh writes about this, Guru Arjan Dev Ji saw in 1598, right? When I think that's the date, when Akbar comes to meet with Guru Arjan Dev Ji, right? And then young Guru Har Gobind Sahib also was there and saw that as well, right? At that time. So
Jvala Singh then says perhaps this was kind of the impulse that, the emperor was doing this, and that, Guru Arjan Dev Ji wanted that for the Sikh community as well, to have their own text and have a workshop and to building out texts like this as well, right? Because on the early manuscripts of Guru Granth Sahib, you have this Shamsha, they have this kind of Islamic symbol of the sun, and that is included on Aad Granth in the early manuscripts as well, right? So Pujol Singh attributes that to kind of this meeting between Akbar and Guru Arjan Dev Ji. So we're going to talk about all this information there in regard to meeting with Kabir and Guru Nanak and the Janam Sakhis. How do we interpret that? Even if they didn't meet in person, how do we interpret that meeting, right? And then also you mentioned, different variations or recensions of Guru Granth Sahib in the early period of that 17th century. You mentioned Meherban. It's Mirabai, the
Sorry,
woman.
Mirabai. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. You're right.
Mirabai is included in a recension called the Pai Banu Beard, and we're going to talk about that as well because, in early texts, Gurblas, it mentions that Guru Arjan Dev Ji did not compile that version, but he did give it a stamp. He said, "Chalo theek hai." He's like, all right. So we're going to talk about that as well. What does that mean then going forward? For how we think about the writings of Mirabai as well. So, and also in regard to the Mughals and the Gurus, this is also, we're going to be drawing from pre-colonial sources, Mema Prakash, Bansali Nama. These are texts from the 18th century that talk about this relation, right? Which is a bit of a roller coaster of a relationship, because at times, like I mentioned, Akbar is coming to Guru Arjan Dev Ji. We have other mentions of Guru Amar Das Ji meeting with Mughal emperors. In Sikh tradition, Guru Nanak Dev Ji blesses Babur, right? How do we make sense of that, right? When we think about what happened. And then, after the Shahidi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, Guru Gobind Singh Ji even writes, Babe ke Babar ke do, aap kare Parmeshwar so, right? That, you have Baba Nanak on one hand. Babe ke means like the people of Baba Nanak, right? The Guru's lineage, the Sikh community. And you have Babar ke, the lineage of Babar. You have these two paths, right? Aap kare Parmeshwar so, that Parmeshwar himself, the divinity, has created these two paths, right? So kind of giving, and then actually following that, I might as well give you the next lines. He says, Deen sa inko pehchano. Deen means kind of dharam or religious practice. That Guru Nanak Dev Ji is the Shah of that, or the lineages, right? Understand, pehchano, that Guru Nanak's lineage is the rulers of religious practice or spirituality. And then it says, Duni pat unko onamanno, that anumanno, understand also or recognize that Babur's lineage, the Mughals, are the patis, are the masters of the world, right? So this is what Guru Gobind Singh is writing about as well. How do we understand that? I'm going to take you through different interpretations of that and provide you the historical context to those lines, which are recited specifically when Guru Gobind Singh is talking about this malap, this meeting with Aurangzeb's son, Bahadur Shah, right? And their relationship. I'm going to be talking about that in the module of Guru Gobind Singh. How do we make sense of that relationship? I'm going to be looking at Hukamname that Guru Gobind Singh is writing to the Sikhs who are serving under Bahadur Shah's battalion, right? And what is Bahadur Shah's relationship with Aurangzeb himself? Because they have conflict as well. Why does Guru Gobind Singh fight with Bahadur Shah in the battle of 1707? All of these, they provoke multiple questions, right? And they then kind of going through that will provide us with interesting perspectives. How do we think about this relationship between the Mughals and the Sikh Gurus, right? So all of these questions will be talked about in the course.
Nice. And then the last thing that came to me whilst we were just discussing that is also then the role of the Aad Granth between basically Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, because you never actually hear about it. You hear Guru Arjan Dev Ji creates the Aad Granth. You hear about the first day it's Prakashed at Harmandir Sahib, and then you hear about Guru Gobind Singh Ji giving it the Gurgaddi, and that's kind of it. So what role does it play? How is it, incorporated into, I guess, what modern academia would call like religious practice, or how is it, and then also how is it authenticated? So you were saying that there's this one recension that's given a stamp of approval, which sounds slightly different to the Ardgranth, but still it's approved. So it's almost like there's two versions then almost side by side, because if you've got almost apocryphal burning in one that doesn't exist in the other, then what does that say about how that process worked in that period?
To understand that whole time period, we have to really dive into kind of the rival group at that time, which is Mehraban and Harji at that point, right? So because there's a debate at that point about, also, who gets to have the manuscript of the Ardgranth, right? So this is also, there's some conflict related to that. Even in the guruship of Guru Tegh Bahadur, there's conflict between him and these groups, right? So that is something that we'll get, in-depth analysis of, kind of thinking through, what is Guru Har Rai, even though he didn't write anything that is included in Guru Granth Sahib. What are his thoughts on, the importance of Gurbani? And I'll be drawing from Mehman Prakash, it's an 18th century text related to that, thinking through, how to also interpret Gurbani, or also this specifically a portion on what does Guru Har Rai say about reciting Gurbani without even understanding what it means, and should we do that? Should we not do that? What is the purpose of that? Versus, because in the modern narrative as well, you get this question like, should I just stop reciting Gurbani if I don't understand what it means? Does it serve any point, right? So that question also gets talked about. But this topic is talked about when you think about, the rival groups, because they're fighting over manuscripts at this point, right? About who gets the copy. And then what does having possession of that first manuscript mean, the Ardgranth? Because these groups were fighting for legitimacy. So, holding those manuscripts meant that you basically had, some sense of legitimacy, right, for the broader Sikh community. So, we're going to talk about that, and then kind of the impulse behind Guru Gobind Singh to kind of complete or kind of assemble the final version, the Dandami, I guess, the recension of Guru Granth Sahib, which, I'll provide some interesting insights from academia. Like Jeevan Diol writes about certain changes that he even writes that, this is a spoiler, a little teaser, that Guru Gobind Singh writes in the word Khalsa in Kabir's writings. And that's unique to the Anandpuri bead recension, right? So Guru Gobind Singh's editing or kind of assembly of Guru Granth Sahib for the Damdami bead is a fascinating process as well. And that actually takes place in the module alongside the exploration of Dasam Granth, right? How do we examine that? What do we think is the purpose behind that? How do people like Jeevan Diol and others, Sian, how do they think through, like, what does that mean for the Khalsa Panth as well, going into the 18th century? What is the connection between the Dasam and the Khalsa? So these types of questions will be kind of explored as well in the first course. There's a lot to get through in the first course, but 6 modules is not enough, but, it is, it's going to be our first step. And then, there's going to be following courses as well.
No, brilliant. I'm really looking forward to it. Anyone and everyone listening, please let us know what other topics or subjects that you want to be covered in this, because I definitely think it's worthwhile putting that forward. I just want to say thank you. We've been talking for like almost 2 hours now. I am going to try my hardest to get this edited as quickly as possible as well. And as always, it was a brilliant little session. It's always good to go back and forth on these topics, and I'm definitely looking forward to joining and seeing what these courses have to offer, because it sounds right up my street, and it sounds exactly what I would want to. It sounds exactly what I would want to have done at university. So the fact that I get the opportunity now, and it's like brilliant, and I don't have to get myself in debt again. So even better.
That's the whole point. Yeah, to provide accessibility, at a rate that's affordable to everybody. And yeah, I'm really excited you'll be joining in. That means a lot, and I'm gonna have a lot of fun.
No, definitely.
Running the course, and I hope the viewers hope to see you guys there as well.
Thank you for making it this far. Your time and curiosity are what keep these conversations alive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the intersections of tradition, academia, and Sikh history with us. If you haven't already, please make sure you sign up to studiessikhi.com. You can find the relevant information in the description below. Also, if this episode resonated with you, don't forget to hit subscribe and also share your thoughts in the comments below regarding what courses you want to see on the new platform. A huge thank you to Jvala Singh for sharing his invaluable insights and passion for Sikh history. Obviously, your support means the world to us, so if you'd like to dive even deeper, consider joining us on Patreon or becoming a YouTube member for exclusive early access to all future episodes. For history lovers, don't miss out on our shop at ramblingsofasikh.co.uk, where you'll find over 180 carefully curated books, stunning historical prints, and ephemera that bring history to life. Stay tuned, we have plenty more enlightening discussions and captivating histories coming your way. Until next time, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.